Thank you, Daryl. We seeded these fields back to grass alfalfa. It was a pubescent wheatgrass alfalfa mix back in 2006. We stripped it down into 40-acre paddocks, 30 to 40-acre paddocks. That wasn't enough. Now we got to strip down into 20-acre paddocks, and we're probably, because of the production on these fields, we're probably going to go down further with polywire. We may even pull out some of these permanent electric fences and to open up more options for the polywire. We don't know. We'll see what the future brings. The paddock on the other side of the trailers, we'll say we were doing a twice over system. We hit that with about 75 animal units for, where are we at here? 3 days. And so that was about 13 cow days per acre. We moved them over here, and I said, well, we used to do a once over system. Let's for contrast purposes this year in the tour, let's hit this with a once over. So we hit this here pasture, this paddock for 9 days, which gave us about 40 cow days per acre. Now this has been recovered. This is a 30-day recovery, and the paddock over there is a 45-day recovery. We will not come back into this one this year. We will come back into that one. If you can tell me what's better, twice over or once over, I'm all ears. This is totally an experiment again.
Lance, the background on this field we're looking at, this was cropped, right?
This was cropped.
For how many years? Is it for eons?
Eons.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the shape of the paddock that we kind of concentrate on our farm, and I think it's something that y'all can look at as well. If you want, there's two modes when we talk about ultra high stock density grazing. You can talk about what we call landscaping mode or animal performance mode. If you want landscaping mode and you're trying to build soil on degraded landscapes, what we have found is the longer and narrower our paddocks are, the more carbon we can get placed on the land. The more square you make your paddocks, the more you'll get run through the animal. And so if we're trying to build soil, if you make long, narrow rectangles and make those cows go up and down, just the walking motion of your mob of livestock, you can get a lot of this trampled on the ground. That's going to build your litter bank. Folks, your soil, you need to have some litter on there. And litter will protect you in droughts. It's an investment. It's like a savings account. And you're going to draw some interest on that later, but you got to get it on the ground. And so just by shaping your paddocks different shapes, you can do that. With our sheep, we're talking about, we're strip grazing our sheep now, and those sheep, when they walk a lot. I call a sheep almost a browser more than a grazer, because they eat a little bit, they walk, they eat a little bit, they walk, they eat a little bit, they walk. And so they're always moving around. And so if you think about cattle, they're a bigger animal, they're going to be able to trample more of that on the ground because they're bigger. They've got a bigger foot imprint. So we're trying to break the capping. We're trying to break the capping on the soil surface to let the rainwater in when you do get a rain. And I'm going to stop right there for right now.
Back in 2015, we actually calved our cow herd over here, so we had 256 head in here, and we were getting up to 60 to 75 cow days per acre on these paddocks. Hindsight, we may have taken too much off that year and didn't lay enough on the soil, and with the drought last year, I say we're, like I said, this is about a 40 cow days per acre here. We got too much bare soil on this ground yet, so yeah, there's always room for improvement.
I don't quite know how to respond. I'm not sure. I think this is an area where the debate between once over and twice over is a tough debate. There are probably times when twice over works, probably times when it doesn't, because of rainfall patterns and that sort of thing. And I think you have to live here, and you have to be a very good observer and watch what happens to really get down to being able to make that decision. And maybe it's not either or. Maybe it's we do this sometimes, we do that sometimes. I think Mother Nature likes chaos. She kind of tries to tell us that. And I just think that disruption occasionally is a good principle. And if we can shake up what we do a little bit, that's beneficial. But we ought to shake it up in such a way that we do good and not do harm. And without more acquaintance with the area watching it more closely, I'd struggle to respond to that question.
What a tactful answer. I have no clue where you stand on this issue.
I don't either.
Okay, so those of you who were here yesterday, I think you heard me say that in an environment like this, I generally figure for every 10 inches of precipitation you receive, you plan one grazing rotation. So if you say this is a 12 to 14 inch area here, that says to me that everything's going to get grazed once. 20 to 40% of your acres can probably be grazed the second time in the growing season. And so that kind of fits with Burke's. Sometimes you do one thing, sometimes you do the other. And I think it becomes important that you keep the grazing records so that you are each season you're altering which of those pastures does get the second grazing, year of exceptional rainfall. Maybe everything gets grazed twice. Below, it's just once, or below normal rainfall, it's just once over on the whole thing. I took a quick look over onto that one, and you said you had taken like 14 off of that, and you're going to go back to that one?
Yep.
Okay. We haven't done it in this workshop. We didn't do it yesterday, but very often one of the things that we do is we go into those pastures and we do a visual assessment of how much feed do you think is out there. And, you know, there's in research and in monitoring, we have several different ways that we can measure forage yield. You know, the classic one is you put the hoop or the quadrat out there and you clip it all down, you weigh it, you dry it, you weigh it again, and then from that measured hoop or quadrat, you estimate what the yield per acre is. I personally have probably cut well over 10,000 of those quadrats, maybe 20 or 30,000. I have made people cut over 100,000 quadrats when I was in the, you know, at the university in the research business. So I know a lot about what that is. One thing that I know about it is in that process there are 7 sources of error. There are 7 places where you can do something not just right and have your estimate come off. We have rising plate meters. There's electronics capacitance meters. All of those have to be calibrated back to clipping to give you a meaningful estimate of yield, and so each one of those has added additional error processes in it. You know, there are some people in academics who, if it's not a clipped quadrat, the number can't be right. Well, my view is the number can't be right because it is a clipped quadrat. Everything that we do in estimating yields is AUDs per acre. I can't even think in terms of pounds of dry matter or tons per acre anymore, really. I don't look at a field and I see that. I look at a field and I see AUDs per acre. What can I harvest off of here? Now, the way you train your eye to do that is you look at a pasture like that and say, oh, that's 34 AUDs per acre. You know what your herd size is. You're using temporary fence. We set up a daily feed strip based on what we estimated was out there. You come back tomorrow, if it's grazed down like that, you guessed wrong. There was only 22 out there. If it's still quite a bit more residual than you feel like you need in this situation, well, maybe there was 40 out there. And so the next day you adjust it. If you do that 30 times, you make a visual estimate and you set your temporary fence to give that herd just what you estimate they need for 30 days. At the end of 30 of those estimates, your eye will be statistically as accurate as any tool we have to measure forage. There's one source of error in this process. You guessed wrong. And that's why I've given away doing any kind of measuring technique, measuring tool. I do everything just visual estimate, and because when I'm at home at least, I'm moving cattle on a daily basis. You know, I'm just every day refreshing, my eye. And on our pastures, every 2 weeks, I go across everything and visually estimate what's there. Build what they call a grazing wedge, which is a ranking of your pastures from highest AUDs per acre to least, and that's what's steering my grazing for the next several weeks. This is on the irrigated pasture, so it's, things happen fast. If you do it on rangeland, we generally think about only doing it once a month, but it's going to be steering where I'm moving the cattle for the entire season and what I'm going to be planning for next year's use on it. But that technique of calibrating your eye by actually doing controlled grazing, that is the best way for you to learn how much feed you have and build a feed profile and do the feed budgeting. And I want to emphasize again, researchers hate it because you're not using a tool, you're not using a device, but there's only one source of error in that technique. And any of you, if you make the commitment, I'm going to do that for a month, your eye is going to be as accurate as my eye is and as any tool that's available to do it. This is kind of in all of our grazing schools, we go through that process. This is a large group. We can't go out in 10 teams out here and do it and catch it all on video. So we're not going to do it this time. But if you use temporary fence and you want to learn how to judge how much feed you have out there, just do it, and you can train yourself. I don't know if that's what I had meant to say in response to that question, but there it is. You can figure it out.
I agree wholeheartedly with what Jim just said. I've tried the methods. I've had people who work with me try the methods, and if you have a desire to be a good observer and you work at it day after day for not too long, but day after day, and you see what the cattle do and you estimate the next one and you estimate the next one, always correlating with what the cattle do, how much residual they leave, was it too much or was it not enough, you're going to get really, really good at it. I'm convinced.
Yeah, I agree with both these guys. It's visual. If you work at it and observe what you're leaving behind, I would rather be conservative and make sure that I leave a little bit extra. I would be that versus liberal. Folks, if you take it down too short, all you're doing is costing yourself money. It's going to take more time for it to come back. So I would rather be over making sure my animals are fed well, because I know they're going to breed back. I'm not going to get foot rot. I'm not going to have pink eye. Why are these animals getting sick? We're not giving the cow enough to eat. She can't pass her nutrients through the milk to the calf, and now you got pink eye in your calf. If you ever see pink eye explode in your herd, it's something that you did probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. And you're out there looking for the magic bullet in your herd, like, what in the world's going on? No, it happened a month ago. Probably limited your cows, and now you're paying for it. I did the same thing when I grazed the cocklebur field I told you all about yesterday. I pushed the cows onto those birds, I made them eat them, then I paid for it. About 7 to 10 days later, I had a bunch of cows limping. I limited them. Then I had some pink eye, more pink eye than I should have had in the calves. Folks, don't limit your animals. Make sure you feed them. Make sure that gut is filled daily.
Any questions, comments, discussion?
I got one more. Just remember, I wanted to bring this up. How many of you all have heard the terms that a cow grazes with 5 mouths? Okay.
I did.
How do you figure 5 mouths on a cow? You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so this can really fool you, and it fooled me early on. You go out to a paddock in the morning, you're going to move your cows, you're like, oh, wait a minute. There's a ton of feed left out here, girls. You all need to take some more of this off. Well, folks, when a cow's got urine or manure on her foot and she's walking around grazing and she's fouling the grass, but just by her grazing behavior, if you got poo on your foot and you step on something and you ask somebody else to come along and eat it, they're not going to eat it. So it can really be a false sense of security looking out there. There's no feed left. It's all been fouled. Now you can come back to that, especially in the wintertime, after it's been snowed on or rained on and you've had time for all that to clean up. But don't look at it and say, I've got a ton of feed. You may not have any. It's all been fouled. So think about that. A cow grazes with 5 mouths.
Yeah, question over here. Something was mentioned before about fly problems. How do you breed cattle? How do you breed cattle to be more resistant to flies? How do you do that?
Within every herd, you look at the animals. There's some that have a lot of flies, some that have no flies. If you make note of that, if you're keeping replacement heifers, keep heifers out of cows with the least amount of flies. If they are loaded with flies, make a point. You're not going to keep any cows out of that. And definitely, when it comes to if you're raising either seed stock bulls for sale or bulls for your own use, never keep a bull out of, no matter what he looks like, I'm going to say never keep a bull out of a cow that's covered with flies.
I'd agree. Don't keep a bull out of a cow that is covered with flies. I'm probably a little the other way. I may keep the heifer calf out of a mother that has flies, hoping that I used a bull out of a mother who didn't, and I want to sell the cow and keep the heifer calf and give it a chance to see if it's a little better than mama. But anyway, you work at it genetically, and either method will work, or a combination of the two. Basically, you cull cows with flies.
So after several generations of that kind of breeding, can you see a correlation that
Absolutely.
some are better than the others?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, it's fairly highly heritable. I can't remember the fellow's name. Jim, you might remember the guy in Arkansas that's done the work on heritability of fly resistance.
I don't remember
But
that.
but anyway, a guy at the University of Arkansas, and he found pretty high heritabilities. It's over 50, which is darn high in heritability for fly resistance.
We look for cows that are very, very slicked off. Those are the cows that just don't harbor any flies. If they got an oily surface on the top of their back, all down their neck, that's a good sign. Those are the ones that exhibit fly resistance. So yeah, you can definitely pick for that.
Would you feel the same way about selection in terms of lice?
The question was, would I feel the same way in terms of selection for lice? Yeah. Why do only 20% of your cows get lice, and the others 80% don't? It's genetics. If you're at that point, you've got your herd big enough that you can take those out of your herd. I would say you could select to get rid of lice. Absolutely.
When we switched to winter grazing, put the pressure on the cows, we quit worming and delicing them. The first couple of winters, we would have cows that the whole patches on their necks would be bare from lice. Well, guess what? Those are the cows that didn't breed back the next year and fell out of the herd. So now we haven't had hardly, every once in a while you'll notice a cow with a small patch, maybe a 4 to 6 inch patch on her neck, but not the whole neck bare like we used to see anymore. So yes, it is very genetically. And
Here's a question that in certain circles we ponder a lot. Some of you may think about it, some of you, this might be a totally foreign idea and the first time you ever heard it. Do flies stress cattle, or do stressed cattle attract flies? I'm in the camp that would say stressed cattle attract flies. And so you think about, what are those stresses? All mammals, birds, I'll say all living creatures, have 4 basic needs, and if they don't meet those needs, they're going to be stressed. There's environmental stress, there's nutritional stress, there's social stress, and there is the other one that I can't remember. maybe it's the stress that we don't know what it is yet. But nutrition, environment, and social, those are all stressors that affect all living creatures. People, cattle, elk, birds in the sky. Think about the nutritional stress. In a lot of places, especially if it has been farmed, we have soils that are mineral depleted. We do not feed complete balanced mineral programs all the time. If those animals are mineral stressed, that might induce flies to come and pester them. People that I know and respect who have gone, and I've never used the cafeteria-style minerals, the free choice minerals. There are people I know and respect, and I have no reason not to believe them, who when they went to cafeteria minerals and allowed the animals to free choice balance their mineral diet, their fly infestations, their pink eye, their foot rot, all went away. Okay. The environmental stress, if you have breeds of livestock that are not adapted to your environment, that is an ongoing chronic stressor. And so non-adapted cattle are more likely to draw flies than are adapted, stock well suited to that environment. Then we have the social stress. Oh, the fourth one is human stress. Social stress occurs within the herd. Do we have, for whatever reason, a dysfunctional herd? Sometimes we blame that on the handlers, the people, but just the size of the herd, the makeup of the herd in terms of gender balance, that can be a stress factor. And then the fourth one is, of course, the stress we put on them, how we handle them, how we interact with them. I don't know if you've seen this, but if I go to a person's place and, you know, I know, man, they don't interact very well with their cattle. And there's a number of factors that can be in place there. I see a lot of flies. Their cattle tend to have, you know, more problems, flies being one of them. You go somewhere and say, wow, that person yeah, they're plugged right into their herd. The herd likes him or her, he or she, they like the herd, and everybody's just in harmony. You tend not to see flies there. So I personally firmly believe that stressed cattle draw flies.
I think I would agree with that too. There's one other area that I think I've observed, but you guys have to tell me. We ran yearlings in a situation in southeastern or northeastern Utah. High elevation, valley bottom, irrigated pastures. There was just a brood ground for mosquitoes. I mean, they were horrendous, and especially along toward dusk in the evening, but any time of the day, the mosquitoes were bad. The cattle pretty well, they were grazing, and they seemed to be happily grazing, but they were always pretty well bunched up. And if you went out there horseback to check them for any foot rot or anything else they might have, because these meadows could have wet spots in them, you get in that bunch and there weren't many mosquitoes. And you get to the edge of that bunch and the mosquitoes would like to eat you alive. I mean, once you left that bunch, you were headed for the barn. And I got the feeling that the combined chemistry of those animals, and maybe the oily hide, but that was a fly repellent. And that one animal by itself didn't have that mixture of chemicals necessarily, and so it wasn't just fly repellent, and I think that's why they wanted to hang together. But I know when I rode my saddle horse out there, I wanted to either be in that bunch or I wanted to be back home. And I don't know, you know, there's a lot of things about that I don't know and understand, but except what I observed.
Yeah, Jay.
So a hypothetical question. You're gonna purchase a replacement in your herd, and you have three options, three critters you're looking at in the pen. One is heavily laden with flies. One has no flies, and one has a very light rate of flies. Which one would you buy?
I'd buy the prettiest one. No, I'd probably select the one that didn't have the flies. You're buying something that has the genetics to show some resistance there, and that's the one I'd probably go after. I wanted to tie in what Jim was saying about the cafeteria-style mineral. Folks, if you're on land that's degraded, it's been farmed, there's no mineralization in the soil, that's an issue. That's the farms that we've got. You know, we've got quite a few lease farms. They were all hayed and hayed and hayed, no fertilizer put down for years and years and years. When we leased that land, we brought cattle into there, they suffered. And so we went with we've been on cafeteria-style mineral now since 2008. We've got a 16-box mineral feeder. It's pulled every move with the cattle. We always keep it at the opposite end of the water. So if we got our water here, we'll pull the mineral to that far corner of the paddock. Cattle have to walk to get it. Now what's interesting is when we move that mineral feeder onto the Judy farm, the one we've owned for a long time, man, it's our best farm. Those cattle will not touch that mineral. But you put them onto a freshly leased farm, a solid covered broom sedge, they will work you over. They'll go through every box licking on that. And so, but now on the pinkeye thing and the flies, folks, we were on that thing in 2008. Missouri that year, I'll never forget it. It was one of the worst animal performance years we ever had. And that's because we had it was around 58 inches of rain for the whole year. In the month of July, we got 37 inches. Unbelievable. I mean, we had like 6 or 8 inches in one day. And that cattle performance was awful. We had pink eye and everything, it seemed like. And so it took several years for those cattle to get that mineral load just right. And now in the last 2 or 3 years, we don't get pink eye anymore. So I don't know if it's a mineral, if it's our grazing. It could be a combination of both. But the mineralization, I think, is huge. So I will say this, cattle have the ability to select. They'll go down through that mineral feeder, and the one that they need, they will pick it out, they'll lick on it a little bit, and the others they'll skip, and a cow is pooping out, 80-85% of that mineral out the butt. And so we like to call our mob our traveling laboratory. They're going across the ranch, remineralizing exactly what's missing. If you feed a complete mineral, they can't do that because it's all tied together in one. So it's working for us. I mean, I like it. Mineral's expensive. I don't care what kind of mineral you feed. But I'll just warn you, on really mineral depleted soil, your cows may need some help until you get that soil restored. If you're not haying it and you're just grazing it every year, you're not mining very many nutrients off of it, you can do it.
Of the 16 minerals choices you mentioned, would one of them be selenium?
Absolutely. Did y'all hear that? One of the minerals is selenium, and boy, they work that one over. We're very selenium deficient in our soils where we're at. The other one they work over, phosphorus. And so don't bankrupt yourself putting phosphorus in there. And by the way, phosphorus is the most expensive of all of them that we feed. And so we do cut it back. We put a little salt with it just to slow them down on it, because they'll empty that box every day on poor farms. Our supplier, we use Free Choice Enterprises out of Wisconsin, and Mark Bader's the owner. He's always telling me, Greg, you got to go lease another farm. I'm like, yeah, you just want to sell me more mineral. Because we're down, since 2008, we're down about 60% on mineral. The cows are not taking mineral. I haven't bought any mineral yet this year. I used to buy a couple loads every couple of years, twice a year, so I can see a major difference. Ian's been feeding this for, 20 years in Africa. I think he's down to 3 minerals now. So they can get that soil fixed correctly. But don't start this program in the wintertime. Make sure it's in the growing season. And if your animals are taking a lot of mineral, you want to slow that down a little bit, speed them up a little bit, give them a higher selection, move that grazing up here in the tops, and they will back off your mineral.
Do you suppose you ever had an issue of overconsumption of selenium?
Did we ever have overconsumption of selenium? I can't answer that. I don't know. I'm not sure what the symptoms would have been of that. Jim's got something to say.
Yeah, University of Missouri done a lot of work on selenium supplementation because it is a real issue in Missouri, and it was a compounding issue with indified-infected fescue. And I'm pretty familiar with that work. We did some of that work. And to the best of my knowledge, there is no work done in Missouri or adjacent states that ever experienced overconsumption of selenium. The symptom is they die.
Greg,
One of the interesting things, go ahead.
with your mineral program, with using that selection, as far as pinkeye, and that has helped a lot in taking care of that.
The question was in regards to our mineral program with pinkeye, has it helped that? Folks, I wish I could say 100% yes. But in the first 3 years, man, I got on Mark about it. I'm like, dang it, I'm still getting pinkeye. One of the boxes that we have in there is iodine. Those cattle can go in there and select iodine, and we see it in the summertime. Oh, they'll tear up iodine. And that's supposed to help. But we still experience pretty bad pinkeye those first 3 years. And I think it's because our farms are just so minerally depleted. But I'm telling you, in the last 3 years, well, this year, if I had some wood, I'd knock on it, we haven't had one single case out of over 300 animals. Not one case, and I've never done that before. Last year we had one.
I'm running a bunch of yearlings for a guy from Montana.
Yep.
And I'm always treating for pinkeye.
Yep.
You know, and I just got a bagged mineral, whatever it's supposed to be, the right kind.
Yep.
And I've got it out there, free choice for them. But you still, every once in a while, you run into that pinkeye. And
I think it just takes a little bit of time to get your mineral level right in your forage. And I'll say this, when you get them tighter and you drop them manure pats every square foot in, let's say, 1 to 2 to 3 years, you're remineralizing that farm a lot quicker than just get them in this whole pasture. It's going to take a while because you can't cover this whole pasture every square foot with a manure pat by giving them the whole thing. So by tightening up your stock and density, moving them more frequently, it just aids in performance of the animals, and you're going to get better mineral distribution across that paddock just because of the manure.
but they will select what they need.
They will select what they need, absolutely. Yep. Copper. People talk about copper with sheep. Folks, these hair sheep, they can eat copper. I mean, it's crazy, but we see the sheep go into one of the minerals in there's copper. It doesn't affect the sheep at all. Now, they say it will kill a woolly sheep, but we haven't seen any. Matter of fact, some people have done some studies on it, say copper knocks the worms out of sheep. I don't know, but I wanted to share that with you.
We had a question back here.
Yep.
Do you feed, or have you ever done much with kelp? Do you know much about
The
kelp?
question
for a
was
mineral?
on kelp, feeding it as a mineral or as a supplement to cattle. We can't afford it. We're too far from the coast. I know people that feed kelp and they have pretty good results with it, but I've also heard people say, I feed kelp and I still get pink eye. You hear Joel Salatin talk, that's the holy grail. You just feed him kelp and all your problems are gone. And it may be on his ranch, but I've heard that it doesn't fix it 100%. But it is expensive unless you live close to the coast.
Is there a greater incidence of pink eye with cattle that have white pigmentation around their eyes?
In general, yes. And there's higher incidence in Bos taurus than there is in Bos indicus. You don't see much pink eye in Brahmin-influenced breeds as you do in English and Continentals. I would say something about kelp. I've never fed kelp because I always figured I couldn't afford it. But an interesting thing that I've made 3 consulting trips to the Falkland Islands. And the Falkland Islands is pretty well complete, or had been completely a sheep economy. There's farms in the Falkland Islands that are on the coast where the sheep literally go down on the beaches, and then there's completely interior farms. Nutritionally, the coastal farms have just generally better health. All the ewes on coastal farms are healthier than the ones on interior farms. On the coast, the sheep go down onto the beaches, onto the shore, and they eat the kelp. Every time the tide goes out and then comes back in, there's kelp left on the beach, and the sheep just every day go down and eat kelp. And those are the healthiest sheep on the Falkland Islands, are the ones that go to the beach and eat kelp. So Anything else, or is it time we need to be moving on, Daryl?
We sure could. We got time for one more question, but we can move to. So.
One more question? Nope. Oh yeah, here we go.
Do you guys see any difference in ovine pinkeye versus bovine pinkeye in treating in the soil health?
When we were in Missouri, we had sheep and cattle both, and to the best of my recollection, I never had pink eye in a sheep. But we also never had pink eye in any of our cattle that were, we had Barzona, cross cattle, and I never had pink eye in anything that was 25% or greater Barzona. I never had pink eye until I got my first Black Angus bull. 75% of his calves the following year had pink eye. None of the Barzona calves had pink eye. Needless to say, I quickly got out of the black business.
I'll say something about white-faced bulls. The South Pole, that's the breed we have. They're a four-way cross: Cinepole, Barzona, Red Angus, and Hereford. So occasionally we will get a white-faced bull. We like to pick. We'll keep a bull if he's got goggle eyes, which he's got the red pigment around the eyes. We can sell those bulls. We have a harder time selling the solid white-faced bull. But a goggle-eyed bull, you've got that red pigment, and most of the time his calves will have that as well. And I've sold some solid white-faced bulls to producers, and they just haven't had any trouble with pink eye. So I think a lot of it might be more animal dependent, if they've got that resistance or not.
Have you had sheep or
I've never had pink eye in a sheep ever, ever.
More of the question that I have or that I've seen with customers or producers that I've worked with is sheep pink eye or ovine pink eye in the cattle? We don't have any way to control it. You can't knock it out of them. If it's bovine pink eye, you can treat for it. You can see the improvement. But when the virus of sheep pink eye gets into cattle, it spreads like wildfire. It doesn't care if they're white-faced, solid black, red, whatever. I think that's what we see. We fight as an outbreak in the cattle more times than not. I don't think it's the bovine. I think it's the sheep pink eye.
Okay.
And I can comment on that too. Those yearlings that I'm running, and a couple years ago we did a swab, and it was the sheep pink eye that they had, and they said there's nothing you really do for that stuff. They had
There's a lot of different strains of pink eye, and that's they give you a pink eye vaccine to give.
Yeah.
Well, you don't know. Jim, you may know, but I think there's over 20 different species of pink eye. How do you know which one to give? How do they know which vaccine to give you?
Well, and that's what we were told by the vets, is that there isn't anything to control the sheep pink eye. They don't have a strain, they don't have a vaccination. So we run around darting like crazy thinking that we're doing some good, and all we're doing is just minimizing some of the symptoms, but they continue to have it, they continue to spread it, and it'll spread from ranch to ranch, over the fence line. We can have the outbreak move to the neighbor's cattle. What we saw was the first year you have a bad outbreak, the second year you'll have a few, the third year you'll basically be cleaned up. What I'm seeing in my cattle is now we're having another outbreak of it. Cattle that I have that are 50 miles away, I don't have any pink eye showing anything. Down in the area where there's an outbreak, my cows don't have it, but the calves do. They don't have any resistance, or as much resistance ever been passed along, obviously.
Yep.
The calves have it, the cows don't. Anything that you've seen, anything that we could do to handle it?
It's very rare that I come to any of these things and actually hear a new question. This is a bona fide new question. I've never even heard that they were different organisms, and that pink eye was uncontrollable in cattle. Never ever heard that.
And it's not that they get it from sheep.
No.
That year that we had the first outbreak, there wasn't any sheep commingled or across the fence or anything. It's a whole different virus that spreads, or they can get it. And what happened in ours, it was the newly introduced cattle to the herd. We had bought some cows and added to the herd. They were the first ones to get it, and they were the ones to have it the worst out of all the cattle. The next year, like I said, very few had it. Maybe 30% of what we'd seen the year before had it. And the third year, basically clean.
Yeah, this pink eye thing, we have a good friend up in North Missouri, pretty close to where Jim used to live. Good friend of ours, Ben Coleman, and he's been hit with it the last 2 years, just absolutely hammered. I mean, 50% of his herd, cows going completely blind, calves going blind, and he's doing apple cider vinegar. He's got the iodine in there. I mean, he's just trying everything he can try, and he just can't get rid of it. And so I'm not sure exactly what his deal is up there, but
Maybe he's got sheep pink eye.
yeah, he might be. It might be.
Go back and tell Benny.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell Ben he's got sheep pink eye. He really get excited on that, but you got to know Ben.
When you were feeding that cafeteria-style mineral, what were the ones that they readily took the most that would control the pink eye?
The ones they readily consumed the most, it seemed like, was the iodine. They go after the iodine. I'll just go through some. I'm not going to get them all, but we've got phosphorus, magnesium, selenium, P and K in there. We've got vitamins A, B, and C. There's calcium in there. There's copper, zinc. There's zinc. There's cobalt. There's cobalt. Sulfur. There's sulfur in there. You know, in the wintertime, you start seeing lice. Boy, don't let that darn sulfur thing go empty on you, because they're in there taking that sulfur. I don't know if they can tell if it helps fight the lice off or not, but we don't see as much lice now as we used to. Making sure we keep that sulfur full. And I'm missing a couple. Oh, there's an alkaline neutralizer in there, and there's an acid neutralizer. A cow's gut, the rumen, needs to be really well at shedding parasites, putting on weight. The pH of the rumen is 7, if you can keep it there. It's tough to do on forage. So we've got an alkaline and an acid neutralizer. So if that cow's gut gets out of whack, she can go in there and lick a little bit of that, and that brings the rumen back more level. So their maximum performance on shedding parasites, if you can keep that pH around 7, it really helps them a lot. And so we'll see that sometimes. They'll tear that up.